So yeah, I will talk about the legislation of cactus species in South Africa. First of all, say that the alien species regulation should be focused, obviously, in the control of invasive species, but also in the prevention of new invasions. And most of the policies are just focused on the control. So, one extreme option that we could have to prevent new invasions would be to ban the import and use of absolutely every single alien species. But as we know, there are so many beneficial alien species, both for forestry, ornamentation, agriculture, and so on. And most of them doesn't have any chance to become invasive. Well, any. Almost any. So we could not consider this option. In the other extreme, we will have the option of prevent nothing. It means just regulate those species that are already invasive and nothing else. But this option is so expensive, and the costs of managing invasive species normally exceed so much the cost of prevention. So the challenge here will be to arrive to a balance where we regulate those species that have so many chances to become invasive, but we have to have the agreement of the stakeholders. So this is quite difficult, conflict of interest as always. So is this possible? I will present the example of the cactus species in South Africa to show you why I think that this is possible. So the family Cactaceae has 1,919 species, which is quite a big family. And all of them, they are native from the American continent. So we don't have any native species here. But Europeans were always so enthusiastic about cacti, and they were always thinking that they are fantastic species. So already when they came back from the first return trip from the New World in the 15th century, they were introducing some of these species to Europe. 2 centuries later, when they established the first settlements in Australia and in South Africa, they came with some of these species with them. But at that point there were just a couple of species, mostly Opuntia and nothing else. But then we arrived to the early 20th century, and we have here Luther Burbank, that was the owner of a nursery in California. And he created this famous spineless Opuntia, and so fancy and all of that. And he started to introduce these varieties and a couple of species more to Europe, but also to Australia. And he sold to Australia the rights to be able to trade with all these species all over the southern hemisphere. So from Australia, more species of cactus were arriving to South Africa. At that point was still just a couple of species, not so many of them. And they were introduced mostly for food reasons and also to create fences around the houses and so on. But really soon after these first introductions, we start to have problems, both in natural ecosystems and in private lands. So something had to be done about it. All this, not prevention, but all the regulations of cactus species started already in the 1911th, when the Agriculture Pest Act decided to list the genus Opuntia. So the approach here was to list the whole genus and to prohibit the importation and also the use of all these species in South Africa. So now we know that this genus has 190 species, so it's quite a long list, but at that point was just Opuntia sp and just. Then we move on to the 1983 when CARA regulations listed 14 invasive cactus species. So we are arriving to this extreme option that I said before, to do not prevent absolutely anything and just regulate those species that were known as invasive in South Africa. And they were listed as category 1, which means that you cannot import them, you cannot use them, you cannot trade with them, or anything like this. And this approach continued in CARA in 2001, in NEMBA in 2009 with 17 species. Maybe at this point, as I said before, there were just a couple of species being introduced to the country, so maybe it makes sense to list just these 17 species. But since 60 years ago, we have a huge ornamental trade of cactus species in South Africa. This is an example of one of the nurseries here. And, sorry, I will move on to the micro. This is me. So you can see that there are hundreds and hundreds of species, and there are no labels at all. So hundreds of new species are coming into the country every year, and obviously every year we have more invasive species being recorded. So this option of do not prevent absolutely anything, I think we cannot consider it anymore. The government knew it.